Joining us now in the studio is Dr. Kevin Manning, the president of Stevenson University. Thank you for being with us.
Happy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again. You wrote recently in the Huffington Post about the future of higher education, where the winds of change are blowing again.
Right. Actually, the origin of the article was my following the newspaper industry for the past 20 years and looking at what's happened, essentially, to see an industry disappear. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that people weren't paying careful attention to what the opportunities were on the internet. And if you think about it, like a newspaper, probably 70% of what a newspaper communicates is information, 30% is insight. A college is the same way. 70% of what we communicate is fact, information, and only 30% is really in another category, practice or other kinds of things. And the opportunity is there for the internet to really make a big difference. And we've seen this over and over again.
So the impact of technology on the newspaper business was mostly for the bad, in terms of profitability at least, or the size of the industry. What could happen in higher education?
Well, I think basically what you see with some of the proprietary for-profit institutions, you know, where they're essentially, the University of Phoenix is essentially replicating a college online nationwide and globally, or UMUC here in Maryland, and you can see this happening everywhere throughout the United States.
How does that affect the end user, the student? I mean, is it the same value proposition if you come to a campus versus going online? That's
a good question, and that's, of course, the fundamental argument in higher education about technology. I think the truth of the matter is it really depends on the age of a student and the discipline. So if you have someone who's 25 years old and who's getting a Ph.D. in mathematics, that technology may lend itself very well to what that person's studying. If a person's in kindergarten and they're, you know, studying whatever they're reading and those kinds of things, I think that faculty instruction is much more important. But there's going to be some kind of balance, you know, between the online instruction and the in-classroom. We're certainly not proposing at Stevenson that we do away with either of those things. But we've really seen more and more of a migration of the internet, technology into the classroom in almost every way, and we think it's just going to continue to happen.
I'm sure many of our viewers are familiar with Stevenson University and the changes there. You've been the president for 14 years now. It was then called Villa Julie College. How has the institution changed?
Well, you know, we've changed dramatically over the past 14 years, not only with the name, but also with the kind of institution we are. So in 2000, when I got there in Green Spring, we had a couple of buildings, and we were essentially a local college, mostly commuters. We had a few residential students. And over the past 14 years, we've spent $150 million on a new campus in Owings Mills. We now have 3 campuses. We hope to eventually have 4 campuses, and 3 of them will be contiguous in Owings Mills with 300 acres. And we now have a residential population of about 1,850 who come from probably 25 different states, all over Maryland, and we have an online division, the School of Graduate and Professional Studies. So all those things were not a part of the Stevenson experience even 10 years ago.
I asked the question to establish your credentials as somebody who's made big changes and really changed the character of the institution. Is that what's going to be needed for a lot of other schools going forward?
Yes, so I think that, and part of the reason I wrote this article initially was not only because I had looked at the newspaper industry, but I was also concerned with the natural tendency of all of us, including myself, to not really be aware of all the threats that are out there. And there are many of them. And higher education especially, you know, we've been around for a long, long time, and essentially we're doing the same thing we did in Plato's day.
In the same way.
In the same way.
Right.
And the reality is everything's changing. So part of the reason that I wrote the article was it came out of an article I had written for one of our magazines, and I'm really trying to establish the fact that unless we adapt, we will not be in business, or we'll be a lot smaller than we are today. And that's true for all of higher education. It's not really just for Stevenson. It's for state schools, for community colleges, for any college in the world now, because you know, there's a professor, Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School, who talks about disruptive innovation. And he's very concerned about what's going to happen to the future of higher ed with technology and the internet. And I feel the same way. It could really change us in many, many ways.
So you talked about the divide between the pure transmission of information, which you said was 70% of the newspaper business, I think. That part maybe can be more easily accomplished online or certainly at a lower cost, but the rest of it, not so much.
Not so much. And I think really, I don't think anyone foresees in the short run just having students study online and not go to a residential campus, because I think these things will continue, and I think they should continue, because a lot of what happens, if you think about it, especially at the undergraduate level, there's a socialization process that goes on between the ages of 17 and 23 years old. I can't imagine most parents saying, oh, sure, Mary, John, go to New York City and I'll give you $50,000 a year and have a good time.
Here's
that's
a laptop.
That's just not going to happen. Yeah. So I think we need to have that residential experience, the in-classroom experience, but it's going to be balanced more so in the future between internet, technology, and other forms of instruction.
Is that a way of reducing costs as well as you know, we've seen higher education, the growth in tuition outpacing inflation for a long time. That can't continue forever, you wouldn't think, especially if there's the possibility of a lower cost innovator coming along. Yeah,
that's true. And I think the answer is yes, it will help to reduce the instructional costs. And just a good example of that is I can't remember exactly what the percentage is, but if a student would come to Stevenson and study part-time in our School of Graduate Professional Studies, the cost per 30 credits is going to be a lot less than it would be if they were studying full-time. But the reality is that when they're studying full-time, they're getting a variety of other benefits that they're not getting when they're studying part-time.
How have you dealt at Stevenson with the MOOCs, the massive open online courses? We've seen all sorts of institutions start to offer these. And there's all sorts of issues connected with them.
There are a lot of issues there. So they began about 4 years ago at Stanford, out in California. There was an IT course that was offered. And I took one last fall, in a mathematics one from Stanford. They're very interesting. We offered one last fall, and we had over 700 students sign up for it in 25 states or 26 states, 26 countries. They're usually free of charge, and they're open to massive numbers of students. And I think a lot of institutions are doing it because they're trying to get the word out about their institution, or there's some faculty member who thinks it would be a good idea to have someone learn these topics. We had done it on forensic studies, which is one of our areas of specialization in the School of Graduate Professional Studies. This fall, we're going to have another one on career architecture, which is our trademark program in the career planning area. So we think it's a good idea. We think it has minimal kind of structural impact in terms of it's not, usually they're free, so that you're not going to really make any money on these things. But I think they can have a role in the whole higher ed mosaic.
What was your experience as a student of this Stanford course?
Well, I have to say I was really impressed. This is not, I have no connection to Stanford at all, but I was really impressed with the way this course was designed, the videos, the information on there. The thing that I said to our academic vice president, which I feel very strongly about, it really makes a difference when you can have a program available 24/7. I mean, we've all, let's assume for a moment that the classroom lecture is a great way to go. The fact of the matter is, you're there for an hour, and then when you leave, unless you have good notes or a good textbook, you can't remember what exactly happened. When you have something online like that, a whole course online with a lecture, you can be there at 3 in the morning, or you can be there at 8 in the morning. It makes a big difference.
Who's most threatened by that? You read about some little schools going out of business. Maybe that's a routine phenomenon. The economy hasn't been great. Are there any kinds of institutions that are most threatened?
Yeah, and this is something that I had shared with our faculty and staff when I first got to Stevenson in 2000. I said that unless we expand, we're going to have a lot of challenges in the future. So a lot of what you're asking about has to do with size. So there's an economy of scale. It's just a reality. It's not necessarily related to the internet, but it could be. And so if you have a smaller institution with a limited budget, they're going to have lots of challenges trying to figure out how to do the technology. The technology is so expensive to do, and yet all the students and parents really expect it to be there when you get there. So smaller colleges will tend to be more threatened.
Before we go, what do you hear from the students, particularly the undergraduates these days? I mean, in higher education, you get a new crop of kids arriving every fall, and you graduate a class every year. What are they interested in? I mean, what majors are they signing up for?
Well, just keeping in mind, so at Stevenson, we're a little bit different than some of the other smaller colleges in that we have so many career-oriented programs. Students come, they pre-select themselves. They want to come into business, they want to come into marketing and things like that. But surprisingly, if you think about this in terms of entertainment kinds of things, they're very interested in our football team. They're very interested in all the sports programs, the intramural sports, and things that you wouldn't necessarily like to believe they're interested in. But I always tell our faculty, you know, for better or worse, North Carolina and Duke are better known for their basketball teams than they are for their academic programs. And the reality is our culture is so entertainment-oriented, and sports is an entertainment, that becomes a big part of the experience at Stevenson as well. So
that reminds me, big lacrosse game.
Yeah, so there's a big lacrosse game tomorrow night against Albright. And as I said before, when we win that game, we'll be back in the NCAA National Championship again. We are the reigning NCAA Division III men's lacrosse champions. We beat RIT last May in Philadelphia.
Well, very good. And the internet can't beat that.
No, that's not. You can't do that on the internet.
Kevin Manning, Stevenson University, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.